I never thought my own parents would have me arrested at a family dinner. But there I was, wrists bound in cold metal, my mother's eyes filled with disgust, my father nodding in approval as if he'd just taken out the trash. They called me a disgrace, a failure, someone who'd thrown her life away. What they didn't know was that in less than 5 minutes, everything they believed about me would shatter. My name is Natalie Graves, and this is the story of how I went from the family disappointment to the woman who made them all stand at attention. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the small coastal town of Harborview, I was always the odd one out. My parents, Gerald and Diane Graves, were pillars of the community. My father owned the most successful maritime insurance firm in 3 counties, and my mother ran a prestigious event planning business that catered to the town's elite. They had a reputation to uphold, an image to maintain, and I was the crack in their perfect porcelain facade. My sister, Claudia, was everything they wanted. Blonde, bubbly, engaged to a lawyer from old money, working as a pediatrician at the local hospital. She smiled in all the right places, laughed at all the right jokes, and never, not once, questioned the path laid out for her. I loved her, but I also resented how easy it all seemed for her. Then there was me. Dark-haired, quiet, stubborn as a storm. I didn't want to work in their businesses. I didn't want to marry someone they approved of. I wanted something they could never understand: freedom. Purpose. A life that was mine. When I was 17, I told them I wanted to join the military. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went pale, and my father's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice low and controlled. "No daughter of mine is going to throw her life away playing soldier." But I wasn't asking for permission. I was telling them. 3 months after I graduated high school, I enlisted. The day I left, my mother cried, not because she'd miss me, but because she was embarrassed. "What will people think?" she kept asking. My father didn't even say goodbye. He just turned his back and walked into his office, closing the door behind him. For years, I sent letters. I called on holidays. I tried to share pieces of my life with them, the training, the deployments, the friends I'd made, the purpose I'd found. But every conversation was the same. My mother would sigh heavily and ask when I was coming home to settle down. My father would barely speak, and when he did, it was always the same disappointed tone, like I was a problem he couldn't solve. Claudia tried to bridge the gap. She'd update me on family news, send photos from holidays I wasn't invited to. "They'll come around," she'd say. But they never did. When I made sergeant, they didn't acknowledge it. When I was deployed overseas, they told people I was traveling for work. When I came home on leave, they made excuses not to see me. I stopped trying after a while. I focused on my career, on the people who actually valued me. I rose through the ranks, earned commendations, led teams through impossible situations. I built a life that had nothing to do with Harborview or the Graves family name. And I fell in love. His name was Tobias Reed, a fellow officer I met during a joint training exercise. He was brilliant, kind, and saw me for exactly who I was, not who my parents wanted me to be. We got married in a small ceremony on base, surrounded by our military family. I didn't invite my parents. I told myself it was because they wouldn't come anyway, but the truth was, I didn't want them there. I didn't want their judgment tainting the happiest day of my life. Years passed. I climbed higher, took on more responsibility, led larger teams. Tobias and I built a beautiful life together, moving from base to base, supporting each other through deployments and challenges. We were happy. Truly happy. And my parents knew none of it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then, 6 months ago, I received an email from Claudia. She was getting married, a big wedding at the Harborview Grand Hotel, the kind of event my mother lived for. And she wanted me there. Please come, she wrote. I miss you. And I think it's time. Mom and Dad have been asking about you. I was skeptical, but Tobias encouraged me. Maybe they've changed, he said. Maybe it's time to try again. So I agreed. I told Claudia I'd be there, that I'd bring Tobias, and that I hoped, truly hoped, we could finally have a normal family gathering. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the Friday before the wedding, at my parents' sprawling waterfront home. As Tobias and I drove through the familiar streets of Harborview, I felt my stomach twist with anxiety. It had been nearly 15 years since I'd been back. Everything looked smaller somehow, less significant than I remembered. We pulled up to the house just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I took a deep breath and squeezed Tobias's hand. Ready? He asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was. The moment we walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. The house was full of people, extended family, Claudia's in-laws, family friends, but the way they looked at me was strange. Pitying almost. My mother greeted us with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Natalie, she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. And this must be Tobias. My father appeared behind her, his face hard and unreadable. Let's get through dinner, he said. We have things to discuss. The words felt like a threat, but I pushed the feeling aside. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe this was just how family reunions felt after so much time apart. We sat down to dinner, a long table filled with expensive china and crystal glasses. I was placed at the far end, away from Claudia, away from my parents. Tobias sat beside me, his hand finding mine under the table. The conversation flowed around us, but I noticed how carefully people avoided asking me anything directly. It was like I was there, but invisible. Then, halfway through the main course, my father stood up. He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. I think it's time we addressed something, he began, his eyes locked on me. My heart started to race. Natalie has made choices over the years that have disappointed this family greatly. She abandoned her responsibilities, rejected every opportunity we gave her, and frankly, embarrassed us. I felt my face flush hot. Tobias's grip on my hand tightened. Dad, Claudia started, but he held up a hand to silence her. We've tried to be patient, he continued. We've hoped she'd come to her senses. But after hearing from several sources about her behavior, her reckless lifestyle, we've decided enough is enough. He nodded toward the doorway, and my blood ran cold. 2 police officers walked into the dining room. The officers stood in the doorway like statues, their uniforms crisp, their expressions neutral. I felt the entire room shift, every eye turning toward me. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, as if she were the victim in this scenario. My father crossed his arms, satisfaction radiating from his rigid posture. This wasn't the first time my parents had tried to control me through humiliation. It was just the most extreme. When I was 16, I'd been accepted into a summer marine biology program at a university 3 states away. I'd worked for months on the application, spent hours researching and writing essays about ocean conservation. When the acceptance letter came, I was thrilled. But my parents saw it differently. You're not going, my father said flatly, not even looking up from his newspaper. We've already enrolled you in your mother's etiquette camp. You need to learn how to present yourself properly if you're ever going to make a good marriage. I argued. I begged. I showed them the scholarship information, explained how rare this opportunity was. My mother just shook her head. Natalie, darling, you're being dramatic. Marine biology? What kind of career is that for a young woman? You need to focus on practical things. Claudia got to go to Paris that summer with her friends. I spent 8 weeks learning which fork to use and how to walk with a book on my head. When I was 18 and announced I wanted to join the military, they didn't just say no. They orchestrated an entire intervention. They invited aunts, uncles, family friends, even our pastor, all to sit me down and explain why I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Women don't belong in combat, my Uncle Roger said, shaking his head. You'll get yourself killed, or worse. Think of the family name, Aunt Beatrice added. What will people say when they find out Gerald Graves' daughter is enlisted? Like some common recruit? My mother cried theatrically. You're breaking my heart, Natalie. After everything we've given you, this is how you repay us? But it was my father's words that cut the deepest. He stood up, looked me straight in the eye, and said, if you do this, you're no longer my daughter. You'll be dead to this family. I enlisted anyway. And true to his word, I became a ghost. For the first 2 years, I tried to maintain contact. I'd call home every Sunday, hoping maybe this time would be different. My mother would answer, her voice cold and clipped. Oh, Natalie. Your father is busy. Claudia's not home. Yes, we're all fine. I really must go. When I came home on my first leave, proud in my uniform, excited to share stories about my training, they acted like I was contagious. My mother literally stepped back when she saw me, as if the uniform itself was somehow offensive. Dinner that night was excruciating. So, Claudia, my father said, deliberately turning his back to me, tell us about medical school applications. I tried to interject. I actually have some news too. I've been selected for. Natalie, please, my mother interrupted. Let your sister finish. This is important. Everything Claudia did was important. Everything I did was invisible. When Claudia got engaged to Preston Whitmore, a lawyer from a family even wealthier than ours, my parents threw an engagement party that cost more than most people's weddings. They rented out the yacht club, hired a live band, invited everyone who mattered in Harborview. The local newspaper covered it. My mother gave a tearful speech about how proud she was to have raised such an accomplished, graceful daughter. I wasn't invited. I found out about it from Claudia, who called me apologetically afterward. They said it would be too complicated with your schedule, she explained, though we both knew that was a lie. I'd been stateside for 3 months. When I got married to Tobias 2 years later, I sent them an announcement. Not an invitation, just a simple card with a photo of us on our wedding day. My mother called, but not to congratulate me. You got married without telling us, she hissed into the phone. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? People are asking questions. What am I supposed to tell them? You could tell them you're happy for me, I said quietly. She laughed, a bitter sound. Happy? Natalie, you married some random military man we've never even met. You didn't have a proper wedding. You didn't even give us the courtesy of being there. This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior we've come to expect from you. I hung up. I didn't call back. The pattern was always the same. Claudia's achievements were celebrated, analyzed, praised. My achievements were ignored, minimized, or used as evidence of my poor judgment. When Claudia bought her first house, my parents helped with the down payment and threw a housewarming party. When I mentioned I'd been promoted to captain, my father changed the subject to talk about his golf game. At family gatherings I was occasionally obligated to attend, usually because Claudia begged me to come. I was treated like a stranger. Relatives would ask Claudia detailed questions about her work, her marriage, her life. When they turned to me, if they turned to me at all, the questions were superficial and uncomfortable. Still in the military, then? Aunt Beatrice would ask, her nose wrinkling slightly. Yes, still serving, I'd reply. Well, she'd sniff, I suppose someone has to do it. My cousin Brian, who dropped out of 3 colleges and was living in his parents' basement at 32, was treated with more respect than I was. At least he was trying to find himself, my mother explained. I was just being stubborn. The worst part wasn't the big moments of rejection. It was the small, constant reminders that I didn't belong. Family photos displayed prominently throughout my parents' house featured Claudia in every room. There was one photo of me, tucked away in the back hallway, from when I was 15. It was like I'd stopped existing after that. Christmas cards sent to extended family featured Claudia, Preston, and my parents, the Graves family. I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't mentioned. When relatives asked about me, my mother would wave her hand dismissively and say, "Oh, Natalie's doing her own thing." Now, let me tell you about Claudia's promotion. Every phone call home, when I bothered to make them, followed the same script. My mother would spend 30 minutes talking about Claudia's life in exhaustive detail, then ask me one generic question about mine before finding an excuse to hang up. My father simply refused to engage. In 15 years, I could count on one hand the number of times he'd spoken directly to me. And each time, it was to express disappointment or issue some kind of ultimatum. "When are you going to stop this nonsense and come home?" he'd ask. "You've made your point. You've had your little adventure. It's time to grow up." The message was clear: my life, my career, my choices, they meant nothing. I would never be enough. Not because of anything I did or didn't do, but because I'd refused to be the daughter they wanted. I'd chosen my own path, and in their eyes, that was unforgivable. So as I sat at that dinner table, watching the police officers approach, I wasn't surprised. Not really. This was just another escalation in a lifetime of attempts to control, diminish, and ultimately break me. What they didn't know was that I was far beyond breaking. And the woman sitting at their table wasn't the insecure girl who'd left Harborview 15 years ago. I was someone else entirely now. Someone they were about to meet for the very first time. The older officer stepped forward, his expression apologetic but professional. He pulled out a folded document from his breast pocket. "Ms. Graves?" he asked, looking directly at me. Before I could respond, my father interjected. "Yes, that's her. Officers, thank you for coming. As I explained on the phone, my daughter has been engaging in fraudulent activities. We have reason to believe she's been misrepresenting herself, possibly involved in identity theft." My mouth fell open. Identity theft? I looked at Tobias, whose face had gone dangerously calm. That was never a good sign. When Tobias went quiet like that, it meant he was holding back a storm. "Mr. Graves," the younger officer said, glancing between my father and me, "will need to verify these claims." "Ma'am, do you have identification?" I reached slowly for my purse, my hands trembling not from fear but from pure rage. Around the table, family members whispered to each other. I caught snippets of their conversations. I heard she's been pretending to be something she's not. Gerald said she's been using fake credentials. Poor Diane, having to deal with this embarrassment. My mother stood up, playing her part perfectly. "Officers, you have to understand. We've tried to help her. We've given her every opportunity to come clean, to ask for help. But she just keeps lying." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I watched in stunned disbelief as she actually produced tears. This wasn't just humiliation. This was a calculated performance, orchestrated and rehearsed. "What exactly am I supposed to have done?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. I placed my military ID and driver's license on the table. The officer picked them up, examining them carefully. My father moved closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. "Natalie, we know you've been telling people you're some kind of high-ranking military officer. We've heard the stories. We know you've been fabricating a career, probably to cover up whatever you've really been doing all these years." "Fabricating?" I repeated slowly. "Don't play dumb," my mother snapped, her tears disappearing as quickly as they'd come. "Did you really think we wouldn't find out? Janet Morrison's son is in the Navy. He made some calls for us. He said there's no way someone like you could be what you claim to be. Said you've probably been lying about everything." Ah. There it was. Janet Morrison, my mother's bridge club nemesis turned ally when it came to tearing me down. Her son, Derek, had washed out of basic training 10 years ago and spent his time since then pretending he was some kind of military expert. Of course they consulted him. "What exactly did Derek tell you?" I asked quietly. My father pulled out his phone, reading from what appeared to be a text message. He said, and I quote, "No woman rises that high that fast. She's either lying about her rank or she slept her way up. Either way, she's an embarrassment to real service members." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. I saw my Aunt Beatrice nodding sagely. Uncle Roger shook his head in disgust. Even some of Claudia's in-laws, people who'd never met me before tonight, looked at me with contempt. Claudia sat frozen, her face pale. "Dad," she whispered, "maybe we should." "Stay out of this, Claudia," my father ordered. "This is about your sister finally facing consequences for her lies." The officer was still examining my identification. His partner had stepped aside and was speaking quietly into his radio. I could see the doubt creeping into the first officer's expression. These were real credentials, issued by the Department of Defense, with security features that couldn't be faked. But my parents weren't done. My mother reached into her own purse and pulled out a folder. "We've documented everything," she said, handing it to the officer. Years of suspicious behavior. Vague explanations about her work. Refusing to provide details about her so-called career. Missing family events with flimsy excuses. And then she shows up here with this man, she gestured dismissively at Tobias, claiming he's her husband, but we've never met him. Never received a wedding invitation. Nothing. "Because you weren't invited," I said through clenched teeth. "Exactly," my father pounced on that. "What kind of daughter gets married without inviting her own parents?" "I'll tell you what kind, the kind who has something to hide." The younger officer returned from his radio call, whispering something to his partner. The older officer's expression shifted slightly, but my father was too caught up in his righteous fury to notice. "Officers, I want her arrested," my father demanded. "For fraud, for identity theft, for whatever charges apply. I want everyone here to see that actions have consequences. That you can't just lie and cheat and expect to get away with it." "Gerald, please," Aunt Beatrice said, though her voice carried more excitement than concern. "Think of Claudia's wedding. The scandal." "The scandal is that I've been too lenient," my father shot back. "I should have done this years ago. Maybe if I had, she wouldn't have spiraled this far." I looked around the table at faces I'd known my whole life. People who'd watched me grow up, who'd come to birthday parties and holiday dinners. Not one of them was speaking up for me. Not one of them was questioning my parents' narrative. They'd already decided I was guilty, just like they'd decided years ago that I was a disappointment. The officer cleared his throat. "Mr. Graves, I understand your concerns, but these credentials appear legitimate. We can't just." "Then call someone who can verify them," my father insisted. "Call her commanding officer. Call whoever you need to call. I want proof, one way or another." "That won't be necessary," Tobias said quietly. They were the first words he'd spoken since the officers arrived. Everyone turned to look at him. My father scoffed. "And who are you to decide what's necessary? You're probably part of whatever scheme she's running." Tobias stood up slowly, his posture relaxed but commanding in a way that made several people unconsciously sit back. "I'm Commander Tobias Reed, United States Navy. And I can assure you, gentlemen," he nodded to the officers, "that my wife's credentials are absolutely legitimate." "Commander," my mother said with a nasty smile. "How convenient. Two liars together." "Ma'am," the older officer began, but my mother cut him off. "Don't ma'am me. I know my daughter. I know what she's capable of. She's been lying and manipulating since she was a teenager. This is just more of the same." Around the table, people nodded. They knew me, they said with their expressions. They knew the truth about Natalie Graves, the rebellious daughter who'd always been trouble, who'd rejected every advantage she'd been given, who'd chosen to throw her life away out of spite. My father turned back to the officers. "So, are you going to do your job or not?" The older officer looked uncomfortable. He glanced at his partner, then at me, then at the IDs still in his hand. "Sir, we can't make an arrest based on a hunch. These credentials have federal security features. If they're fake, that's a serious federal crime, and we'd need to involve. Then involve whoever you need to involve, my father roared. I'm not letting her walk out of here until this is resolved. That's when it happened. That's when my father made his fatal mistake. He nodded to the younger officer and said, "At least detain her until we can sort this out. Put her in handcuffs. Make sure she doesn't run." The room went absolutely silent. Even my mother looked shocked. "Dad," Claudia gasped. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," he said coldly. "Officer, please." The younger officer looked at his partner, who gave a slight, reluctant nod. They'd been called to a disturbance, given a complaint from a prominent local businessman. They had to at least investigate, even if everything about the situation felt wrong. The younger officer approached me, handcuffs in hand. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to ask you to come with us to sort this out." I stood slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. This was really happening. My own parents had orchestrated my arrest at a family dinner. They'd turned my sister's rehearsal dinner into a public execution. Tobias moved to intervene, but I caught his eye and gave a tiny shake of my head. "Not yet," I tried to tell him with my eyes. "Let them finish. Let them commit completely to this path they've chosen." The cold metal closed around my wrists. Click. Click. The sound echoed in the silent dining room. My mother was crying again, real tears this time, but I suspected they were tears of satisfaction rather than sadness. My father stood tall, arms crossed, looking vindicated. Around the table, relatives watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. "I want to press full charges," my father said. "Whatever you find, I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The older officer was speaking into his radio again, reading off information from my military ID. I could hear the tinny voice of the dispatcher responding, but couldn't make out the words. "Well?" my father demanded. "What did they say?" The officer held up a hand, still listening. His expression changed from confusion to surprise to something that looked almost like fear. He pulled the radio away from his ear and stared at me with new eyes. "Sir," he said slowly, "dispatch is saying we need to." That's when the front door opened. We all heard it, the sound of footsteps in the foyer, multiple sets of them, moving with military precision. My father frowned. "Who?" 4 people in naval uniforms appeared in the dining room doorway. 3 of them were carrying sidearms. The 4th, a woman with silver hair and stars on her collar, surveyed the room with the kind of authority that makes generals stand straighter. She looked at the officers, at me in handcuffs, and then her gaze landed on my father. When she spoke, her voice could have frozen fire. "Would someone like to explain to me why Rear Admiral Natalie Graves is currently in restraints?" The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite detonated yet. Rear Admiral. The title echoed through the dining room, bouncing off the expensive wallpaper and crystal chandeliers, settling into the consciousness of every person at that table. My father's face went through several colors, red, white, then a sickly gray. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Around the table, jaws dropped in perfect synchronization. The woman with the stars on her collar was Vice Admiral Patricia Holloway, commander of Naval Surface Forces Atlantic. She was also my direct superior and had become something of a mentor over the past 3 years. I'd mentioned to her in passing, months ago, that I'd be attending my sister's wedding. I hadn't told her about the family dynamics, but Patricia was brilliant at reading between lines. "Ma'am," the older police officer stammered, immediately straightening to something resembling attention. "We received a call about suspected fraud and identity theft. Mr. Graves reported that his daughter was..." "Was what?" Patricia's voice could cut through steel. "Impersonating a flag officer? Do you have any idea how many federal agencies would already be involved if that were actually the case?" She turned her laser focus on my father. "Mr. Graves, I presume?" My father opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No sound came out. Patricia walked further into the room, her 3-person security detail remaining by the door. She gestured to me. "Officer, remove those restraints." Immediately. The younger officer fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the handcuffs. The moment they fell away, I rubbed my wrists, feeling the indentations the metal had left behind. "Admiral Graves," Patricia said, her tone softening slightly as she addressed me. "Are you all right?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions swirling inside me. Patricia nodded, then turned back to survey the room. Her gaze landed on each person at the table, and I watched them wilt under the weight of it. This was a woman who commanded thousands of sailors, who advised the Joint Chiefs, who had the ear of the Secretary of the Navy. And she was standing in my parents' dining room, asking why I'd been handcuffed. "Let me make sure I understand the situation," Patricia said, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone lean back slightly. "You called the police on your own daughter, claiming she was committing fraud by pretending to be a naval officer. Is that correct?" My mother found her voice first, though it came out as a whisper. "We didn't know. We thought she was lying. Someone told us that women couldn't." "Couldn't what?" Patricia interrupted. "Couldn't serve their country with distinction? Couldn't earn rank through merit and dedication? Couldn't command respect from their peers and subordinates?" She paused, letting the words sink in. "Mrs. Graves, I've served in the United States Navy for 32 years. I've seen plenty of things that people claimed women couldn't do. And I've watched women do them anyway." Uncle Roger, who'd never been good at reading a room, decided this was his moment to contribute. "Now see here, we had legitimate concerns," Derek Morrison said. Derek Morrison? One of Patricia's security detail, a lieutenant commander whose name tag read Foster, actually laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "You mean the Derek Morrison who was discharged from basic training for failing to meet minimum fitness standards? That's your military expert?" Uncle Roger's face turned purple. Patricia continued, pulling out her phone. "Perhaps you'd like to see Admiral Graves' service record? I can pull up the unclassified portions right now. Should I start with her 3 Navy Commendation Medals? Or perhaps the Defense Meritorious Service Medal she received for her work coordinating multinational naval operations? Or we could discuss her 2 deployments to the Persian Gulf, where she..." "Stop," my father said hoarsely. "Just stop." But Patricia wasn't finished. She was just getting started, and I recognized the look in her eyes. This wasn't just about defending me anymore. This was about every female officer who'd ever been doubted, every woman who'd been told she didn't belong, every qualified professional who'd had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Admiral Graves graduated top of her class at the Naval Academy, Patricia continued, her voice rising slightly. She was selected for the nuclear propulsion program, one of the most competitive and demanding specializations in the Navy. She commanded a guided missile destroyer at 36, making her one of the youngest officers to do so. She's written policy papers that have been adopted fleet-wide. She's trained hundreds of sailors who've gone on to distinguished careers of their own. Claudia was crying now, her hands covering her face. Preston, her fiancé, had his arm around her, his expression stunned. The rest of the family sat frozen, like they were watching a car crash in slow motion. Tobias had moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. I squeezed it gratefully. He'd wanted to intervene earlier, wanted to stop this before it got this far, but I'd needed to see it through. I'd needed to watch my parents commit fully to their conviction that I was worthless, that I was a liar, that I was an embarrassment. Because now there was no taking it back. "Your daughter," Patricia said, turning to address both my parents directly, "is one of the finest officers I've ever had the privilege of serving alongside. She's brilliant, dedicated, and respected throughout the fleet. And you had her arrested at a family dinner because you couldn't believe that she'd succeeded without your approval or support." My mother was openly weeping now, but these weren't the performative tears from earlier. These were the tears of someone watching their entire worldview collapse. My father had sunk into his chair, his face in his hands. "The phone call we received," the older police officer said quietly, finding his voice again, claimed that Ms. Graves, Admiral Graves, was engaged in identity theft and fraud. That she was using fake military credentials to deceive people. On what evidence? Patricia demanded. The officer gestured helplessly at my father. Mr. Graves said he'd had someone verify that his daughter couldn't possibly hold the rank she claimed. He seemed very certain. Certain based on what? Patricia pressed. Based on the word of a failed recruit? Based on his own prejudices? Based on the fact that he apparently hasn't spoken to his daughter in over a decade and has no idea who she's become? No one answered. What could they say? Patricia turned to me, her expression softening again. Admiral, I apologize that you were subjected to this. If you'd like to file a complaint. No, ma'am, I said quietly. That won't be necessary. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Understood. However, I think it's important that everyone in this room understands the gravity of what happened here tonight. Falsely reporting a flag officer for fraud is not a small matter. It wastes law enforcement resources, it damages reputations, and it demonstrates a profound lack of judgment. She let that sink in before continuing. I won't pursue official action because Admiral Graves has requested that I don't. But make no mistake, what happened here tonight will be remembered. By me. By my staff. And by every officer who hears this story, and believe me, they will hear it. The threat was clear. My parents' names would become a cautionary tale in naval circles. The wealthy civilians who tried to have their decorated daughter arrested because they couldn't accept her success. Aunt Beatrice had gone pale. Uncle Roger was staring at his plate. Even the people who'd been nodding along with my parents' accusations earlier now looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Patricia turned to leave, her security detail falling in behind her. But she paused at the door, looking back one more time. Admiral Graves has a standing invitation to dine with me and my family anytime she's in the area. She's always welcome at my table. The implication was clear, unlike at this one. After they left, the silence was absolute. Someone's fork clinked against a plate, and everyone jumped. I looked around the table one more time, meeting the eyes of people who'd known me my entire life. People who'd chosen to believe the worst of me without question. People who'd been so ready to watch me humiliated and arrested that they hadn't stopped to consider whether any of it made sense. The message ended. I stared at the phone, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Did she really just, Tobias started, his voice tight with anger. Make it about herself? I finished. Yeah. She did. Not once in that message had Claudia said, I'm sorry they did that to you. Not once had she acknowledged that having me arrested was wrong. Instead, it was about her ruined dinner, her horrified in-laws, her disaster of an evening. I thought about all the times over the years when Claudia had been the buffer, the bridge between me and our parents. How she'd call to update me on family news, always with the gentle suggestion that maybe I should reach out more, try harder, be more understanding. How she'd say things like, you know how Dad is, as if his cruelty was just a personality quirk I needed to accept. She'd never been protecting me. She'd been protecting the family system. Making sure I stayed just connected enough that she didn't have to choose sides, that she could maintain her role as the perfect daughter without the guilt of having a completely estranged sister. I'm deleting this, I said, and before Tobias could respond, I blocked Claudia's number. Then my mother's. Then my father's. One by one, I went through my contacts, blocking every family member who'd been in that dining room tonight. Aunt Beatrice. Uncle Roger. Cousins I'd grown up with. All of them. Nat, Tobias said carefully. Are you sure? Maybe in a few days, when emotions aren't so high. They had me arrested, Tobias, I said, my voice flat. My own father called the police and had me handcuffed because he was so convinced I was a liar that he didn't even consider checking his facts first. And my mother stood there crying fake tears while she told those officers I'd been lying and manipulating since I was a teenager. And my sister? I held up the phone. She just asked me to come back and fix it for her. Tobias pulled me against him, and I finally let myself cry. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd held back at dinner, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone grieving something they'd never really had but had always hoped for. When I finally stopped, when there were no tears left, I pulled back and wiped my face. I need to make some decisions, I said. Over the next hour, Tobias and I talked through everything. We ordered room service that neither of us really ate and made a plan for what came next. First, we would not be attending Claudia's wedding. I drafted an email, kept it brief and professional, and sent it to her wedding planner. Due to unforeseen family circumstances, Commander and Mrs. Reed will be unable to attend. We've arranged for our gift to be delivered directly to your registry address. Best wishes for your future. Second, I would be changing my emergency contact information in all my military records. My parents had been listed for years, a holdover from when I'd first enlisted and hadn't quite accepted that they'd never be the family I needed. Tobias would be primary now, and Patricia Holloway had agreed to be secondary. Third, would be speaking with the base legal office about a restraining order. Not because I thought my parents would physically harm me, but because I needed a legal barrier. Something official that said, "You are not welcome in my life." "You don't have to decide all of this tonight," Tobias said gently. "Yes, I do," I replied. "Because if I don't, if I let myself soften, I'll make excuses for them. I'll start thinking maybe it wasn't that bad, maybe they deserve another chance. And I can't do that anymore. I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep them warm." Tobias nodded, understanding in his eyes. He'd watched me make excuses for them for years. He'd been patient, never pushing, always supporting whatever decision I made about my family. But I could see the relief in his expression now. Relief that I was finally, truly done. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was from my father, sent to my personal email address since I'd blocked his number. "Natalie," it began. No dear, no warmth. Just my name. "I spoke with Vice Admiral Holloway's office this evening. They confirmed your rank and position. I must admit I was shocked. Your mother and I had no idea you'd risen so high in your career. We're very proud of your accomplishments, even if tonight's events were unfortunate. I think we all said things in the heat of the moment that we didn't mean. Perhaps in a few weeks, when emotions have settled, we can sit down and discuss this like rational adults. I'm sure we can put this misunderstanding behind us. Claudia is very upset, and it would mean a lot to her if you would reconsider attending the wedding. After all, family is family. Dad." I read it twice, then handed the phone to Tobias. He read it, his jaw tightening with each line. "Unfortunate events," he quoted. "Misunderstanding. He's rewriting the whole thing already." "Of course he is," I said. "Now that he knows I'm actually successful, now that I have rank and status that he can understand and value, suddenly I'm worth claiming again. Suddenly we're family." "Are you going to respond?" Tobias asked. I took the phone back and typed out a reply. Short. Final. "Gerald, you are not proud of my accomplishments. You're embarrassed that you were proven wrong in front of witnesses. Tonight was not a misunderstanding. It was the logical conclusion of 33 years of dismissal, contempt, and emotional neglect. You didn't believe in me when I had nothing to prove except my own worth. You don't get to claim pride now that I have rank you can brag about. I will not be attending Claudia's wedding. I will not be discussing this like rational adults. I will not be in contact with you, Mom, or anyone else who was present tonight. This isn't anger. This is self-preservation. Do not contact me again. Natalie." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Tobias squeezed my hand. "How do you feel?" "Lighter," I admitted. "Terrified, but lighter." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of what I'd just done settling over both of us. I'd cut ties with my entire family. Burned bridges so thoroughly there'd be nothing left but ash. Part of me, the part that still remembered being a little girl desperate for her father's approval, wanted to take it all back. Wanted to apologize, to smooth things over, to be small and quiet and undemanding. But I wasn't that little girl anymore. I was a rear admiral in the United States Navy. I commanded thousands of sailors. I made decisions that affected national security. I'd stared down foreign adversaries and navigated political minefields that would have broken lesser officers. Surely I could survive cutting off contact with people who'd never valued me anyway. We should try to sleep, Tobias said eventually. Tomorrow's going to be long. He was right. Tomorrow we'd drive back to base. I'd have to brief Patricia on everything that had happened, deal with the inevitable fallout as word spread through the officer community. There would be questions, concerns, maybe even an investigation into whether the incident compromised my security clearance in any way. But tonight, I was just a woman in a hotel room, mourning the family she'd never really had and trying to figure out who she was without the weight of their disappointment. I changed into the spare clothes from our car, washed my face, and climbed into bed beside my husband. He held me close, his heartbeat steady against my back. "I love you," he whispered. "And I'm so damn proud of you." Those words, from him, meant more than any acknowledgement from my parents ever could have. I closed my eyes and, eventually, slept. And when I woke up the next morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. The drive back to base was quiet. Tobias kept one hand on the wheel and one hand holding mine, occasionally glancing over to check on me. The Virginia coastline stretched out beside us, gray ocean meeting gray sky in a seamless horizon. It felt appropriate somehow, this liminal space between what had been and what would come next. My phone sat in my lap, powered on but silent. I'd unblocked one number before we left the hotel, Patricia Holloway's. If my commanding officer needed to reach me, I needed to be available. Everything else could wait. We were about an hour from base when the phone finally rang. Patricia's name flashed on the screen. "Admiral Graves," I answered, my voice automatically shifting into professional mode. "Natalie," Patricia replied, using my first name, which she rarely did. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing, ma'am. I need you to come directly to my office when you arrive on base. We need to discuss last night, and I want to brief you on some developments before you hear about them through the grapevine." My stomach tightened. "Developments?" "Nothing bad," Patricia assured me quickly. "But things are moving faster than I anticipated. Can you be here by 1300 hours? I glanced at the dashboard clock. That gave us just enough time to stop by our quarters and change into uniform. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. And Natalie? You did nothing wrong. Remember that." The call ended, and I looked at Tobias. "She wants to see me as soon as we get back." "Want me to come with you?" he offered. I shook my head. "No, but thank you. This is something I need to handle on my own." We made it to base with 20 minutes to spare. Our quarters were in officer housing, a modest 2-bedroom unit that we turned into a home over the past year. Walking through the door felt like stepping into a sanctuary. Here, everything made sense. Here, I was valued for exactly who I was. I showered quickly, washing away the last physical traces of the previous night, then dressed in my service khakis. The uniform felt like armor, each ribbon and insignia a reminder of what I'd accomplished, who I'd become. I studied myself in the mirror, running through Patricia's words again. "You did nothing wrong." But if that was true, why did I still feel like I'd somehow failed? Tobias appeared behind me, already in his own uniform. He rested his hands on my shoulders. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." Patricia's office was in the main administrative building, a corner suite with windows overlooking the harbor. Her aide, a sharp young lieutenant named Shin, no, I caught myself, remembering the name restriction. Her aide, Lieutenant Harris, showed me in immediately. Patricia stood when I entered, which was unusual. She gestured to the informal seating area by the windows rather than the chairs in front of her desk. "Sit, please." "Coffee?" No, thank you, ma'am. She poured herself a cup and settled into the chair across from me. For a moment, she just studied me with those sharp eyes that had evaluated countless officers over her decades of service. First things first, she began. The Harborview Police Department called me this morning. Officially. The chief wanted to apologize personally for what happened and to assure me that his officers followed proper protocol given the information they were provided. I nodded slowly. The officers were professional. They were put in an impossible situation. Agreed. However, the chief is also opening an internal review into how the complaint was handled. Apparently, your father is quite influential in local circles, and there are questions about whether that influence led to the officers being dispatched when normally such a complaint would have been investigated more thoroughly first. I don't want the officers to get in trouble for my family's dysfunction, I said quickly. They won't, Patricia assured me. This is about policy and procedure, not punishing anyone. But Natalie, your father's actions last night crossed several lines. Not just morally, but potentially legally. I felt my chest tighten. Ma'am, I don't want to pursue charges. I just want to move on. I understand that. But you need to understand the position you're in. Patricia leaned forward slightly. You're a flag officer. What happens to you, what's done to you, it matters beyond just personal grievance. When your father filed that false report, when he claimed you were committing fraud and identity theft, he wasn't just attacking you as his daughter. He was making false claims about a United States military officer. So this isn't my decision anymore? I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. The decision about criminal charges is yours, Patricia clarified. But there will be an investigation regardless, because the integrity of our officer corps has been called into question. The Navy takes that seriously. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course. I'd been so focused on my personal pain that I hadn't thought through the larger implications. My father hadn't just humiliated his daughter. He'd attempted to publicly discredit a rear admiral. What do you need from me? I asked. For now, just a formal statement about what happened. Commander Wilson from JAG will be contacting you to schedule a time. Beyond that, I need you to continue doing your job. Don't let this derail your career or undermine your confidence. Yes, ma'am. Patricia's expression softened. How are you really doing, Natalie? The question, asked with genuine concern by a woman I deeply respected, nearly broke through my careful composure. I've cut contact with my entire family, I said. Blocked their numbers, declined my sister's wedding, sent an email to my father telling him never to contact me again. And I keep waiting to feel guilty about it, but mostly I just feel relieved. That's not unusual, Patricia said. You've been carrying the weight of their rejection for years. Setting it down doesn't feel like loss. It feels like freedom. Did you? I hesitated, then decided to ask. Have you ever had to cut ties with family? Patricia was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. My father didn't speak to me for 12 years after I made Admiral. He told me I'd become too big for my britches, that I'd forgotten where I came from. The truth was, I'd just stopped letting him define my worth. She looked back at me. He came around eventually, but those 12 years taught me something important. The people who truly love you don't require you to diminish yourself to make them comfortable. I absorbed that, feeling something tight in my chest start to loosen. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Patricia continued. The story is spreading. Not through official channels, but through the informal network. By tomorrow, every flag officer on the East Coast will have heard some version of what happened. My stomach dropped. Oh God. It's not necessarily bad, Patricia said quickly. The narrative that's circulating paints you in a sympathetic light. Decorated officer humiliated by her own family, that kind of thing. But you need to be prepared for questions, for attention, for people choosing sides. I don't want sides, I said. I don't want this to become some kind of public drama. I know. But you're a woman in a high-ranking position who was publicly doubted by her own family. That's going to resonate with a lot of people, especially other women in uniform who faced similar skepticism. Patricia paused. There's also been interest from a few media outlets. Nothing official yet, but reporters have been calling the Public Affairs Office asking for confirmation and comment. Absolutely not, I said immediately. No media. No interviews. This is private. I've already told PAO to decline all requests and issue a standard no-comment response. But Natalie, you can't control this narrative completely. It's already out there. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ships in harbor. Somewhere out there were sailors who served under my command, who looked to me for leadership and guidance. What would they think when they heard about this? Would they see me as strong for standing up to my family, or weak for having been treated that way in the first place? I've spent my entire career proving myself, I said quietly. Every step of the way, I've had to work twice as hard, be twice as good, make half as many mistakes. And I've been okay with that because I knew what I signed up for. But this? I turned back to Patricia. This feels different. This feels like no matter what I achieve, I'll always be the woman whose family didn't believe in her. Or, Patricia countered, you could be the woman who succeeded brilliantly despite having no support system. The woman who built herself from nothing because she had the strength and determination to do so. That's not a weakness, Natalie. That's extraordinary. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to reframe this narrative the way she was suggesting. But the wound was still too fresh, the humiliation too recent. Take the weekend, Patricia said, reading my hesitation. Process this however you need to. Talk to the chaplain if that would help. Talk to your husband. Hell, take a run and scream at the ocean if you need to. But on Monday, I need you back and focused, because we have a fleet to run and I need my best people operating at full capacity. Understood, ma'am. As I stood to leave, Patricia added one more thing. For what it's worth, I'm glad you cut contact with them. Some bridges deserve to be burned. I made it back to my quarters before the facade cracked. Tobias was there, had clearly been waiting for me. He didn't ask how it went. He just wrapped his arms around me and let me fall apart. They're making it official, I sobbed into his shoulder. There's going to be an investigation. Everyone's going to know. My entire command is going to hear about how my own father had me arrested because he didn't believe I was capable of success. They're going to hear that your father was wrong, Tobias corrected firmly. They're going to hear that you're so accomplished, so beyond reproach, that when someone made false claims about you, the Navy itself stepped in to set the record straight. I pulled back to look at him. That's not how people will see it. Then they're wrong too, he said simply. Nat, you can't control how people interpret this. All you can control is how you move forward. And the woman I know, the woman I married, she moves forward with her head high and her standards unwavering. He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. The weekend passed in a blur. I did take that run Patricia had suggested, pounding out miles along the beach until my lungs burned and my legs ached. I sat in our quarters and wrote out everything that had happened, trying to process it through words on a page. I called a few close friends from the academy, fellow officers who'd known me since the beginning, and their support helped more than I'd expected. And I didn't check my email or my blocked messages, even though part of me was desperately curious about what my family was saying, how they were spinning this, whether any of them actually understood what they'd done. By Sunday evening, I felt steadier. Not healed, that would take time, but ready to face Monday and whatever came with it. Tobias and I were making dinner together when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Commander Phillips from PAO. Public Affairs Office. My stomach sank as Tobias answered on speaker. Sir, I apologize for calling on a Sunday evening, Phillips said, but we have a situation developing that Admiral Graves needs to be aware of. Her sister has just posted something on social media. It's getting significant traction, and we wanted you to know before you see it elsewhere. I closed my eyes. Of course Claudia had. Of course she couldn't just let this die quietly. What did she post? I asked. It's a long statement about family loyalty and forgiveness. She doesn't name you directly, but it's pretty clear who she's referring to. She's painting herself as the victim of your abandonment, and asking for prayers as she deals with this family crisis during what should be the happiest time of her life. I should have been angry. Instead, I just felt tired. Because this, too, was predictable. In the Graves family narrative, I would always be the problem, the one who caused trouble, the one who couldn't just let things go. Thank you for the heads up, Commander, I said. I won't be responding. Understood, ma'am. We'll continue to decline all media requests and refer people to our standard statement. After he hung up, Tobias looked at me carefully. You okay? Yeah, I said, and surprisingly, I meant it. Because this just proves I made the right decision. Monday morning arrived with the kind of sharp clarity that follows a storm. I woke before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of military discipline, and went through my morning routine with mechanical precision. Shower. Uniform. Coffee. Each action a small assertion of control over a life that had felt chaotic for days. Tobias was already up, making breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toast, simple and grounding. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of partnership and mutual understanding. You've got this, he said as I gathered my briefcase and cover. I know, I replied. And for the first time since Friday night, I actually believed it. The walk across base to my office felt different. I noticed people's glances, the way conversations quieted as I passed. Word had definitely spread. But there was something in those glances that surprised me, not pity or judgment, but something that looked like respect. Even solidarity. My aide, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Brennan, was already at her desk when I arrived. She stood immediately, her expression professional but warm. Good morning, Admiral. Your calendar is clear until the JAG appointment at 10:00. Admiral Holloway requested a brief meeting at 09:30. Thank you, Sarah. I hesitated, then asked, has there been any unusual chatter? Anything I should be aware of? Sarah's professionalism cracked slightly, revealing a fierce protectiveness I hadn't fully appreciated before. There's been talk, ma'am. But if anyone has anything negative to say, they're keeping it to themselves in my presence. She paused. For what it's worth, Admiral, I think everyone who knows you is just impressed you didn't deck your father yourself. Despite everything, I smiled. That would have been conduct unbecoming. Would have been worth it, though, Sarah muttered, then caught herself. Sorry, ma'am. That was inappropriate. It was also exactly what I needed to hear. Thank you, Sarah. The meeting with Patricia was brief. She wanted to confirm I was ready to return to duty, review the upcoming week's commitments, and remind me that her door was always open. The JAG interview should be straightforward, she assured me. Commander Wilson is excellent. Just tell the truth and let the process work. The JAG interview was indeed straightforward, though emotionally exhausting. Commander Wilson was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She walked me through the events of Friday night methodically, asking clarifying questions but never pushing when I needed a moment to compose myself. Admiral, I want to be clear about something, she said when we'd finished the formal statement. What your father did meets the criteria for filing a false police report. The fact that you're a military officer adds additional dimensions, including potential violations of federal law regarding false statements about government officials. I don't want to prosecute him, I said firmly. I understand. And that's your right. However, the Navy may choose to pursue its own inquiry independent of criminal charges. Your father's actions could be seen as an attempt to undermine or discredit a flag officer, which has implications for military readiness and morale. I just want it to be over, I said, hearing the exhaustion in my own voice. Commander Wilson's expression softened. I know. Unfortunately, once something like this enters the system, it takes on a life of its own. But I promise we'll handle this as efficiently and discreetly as possible. After the interview, I returned to my office to find a stack of message slips on my desk. Officers from across the fleet had called or emailed, not asking for details or gossip, but simply expressing support. Brief notes, often just a sentence or two, but each one felt like a lifeline. You've always had my respect. Now you have my admiration too. Captain Rodriguez. Standing with you, Admiral. Commander Patterson. Families can be difficult. You handled yourself with grace. Rear Admiral Chen. I stopped, smiled at the name coincidence, and continued reading. There were dozens of them. People I'd served with, commanded, mentored. People who'd only known me professionally but who had clearly heard something about what happened and wanted me to know they stood with me. I was still reading through them when Sarah buzzed my intercom. Admiral, you have a visitor. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Who is it? Claudia Graves, ma'am. She says she's your sister. My hand froze over the message slips. Claudia was here. On base. At my office. How did she get past the gate? I asked. She's with Dr. Preston Whitmore. He has visitor credentials from when he consulted on a legal case last year. Security called to confirm before allowing them through. Of course Preston had credentials. Of course they'd found a way through. The Graves family had always been good at finding loopholes, at accessing places they weren't wanted. Do you want me to have security escort them off base? Sarah asked, her tone making it clear she'd be happy to do exactly that. I considered it. Part of me wanted to hide, to avoid this confrontation entirely. But I was a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy. I didn't hide from difficult conversations. Give me 5 minutes, then send them in. I used those 5 minutes to center myself. I stood at the window overlooking the harbor, watching ships move in and out with purposeful efficiency. This was my world. My domain. Here, I was in control. When the door opened, Claudia entered first, Preston following close behind. My sister looked terrible, eyes red and puffy, face drawn, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual polished outfits. Preston looked uncomfortable, like he knew this was a mistake but couldn't talk his fiancée out of it. Natalie, Claudia breathed, moving toward me. I held up a hand, stopping her. Why are you here, Claudia? I had to see you. You won't answer my calls, you blocked me, you won't respond to my emails. All deliberate choices, I interrupted. I made it very clear I didn't want contact. But you're my sister, she said, tears starting to flow. We can't just not talk anymore. We can't just be over. We were already over, I said quietly. Friday night just made it official. Preston stepped forward slightly. Admiral Graves, I apologize for the intrusion. I told Claudia this wasn't a good idea, but she insisted. She's been devastated since the rehearsal dinner. Has she? I looked at my sister. Are you devastated because of what was done to me, or because of how it affected your wedding plans? Claudia flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? Your voicemail on Friday night was all about how the dinner was ruined, how Preston's parents were horrified, how I was doing this to you. Not once did you acknowledge that I'd been handcuffed and arrested by our own father. I know, and I'm sorry about that message. I was in shock, I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking perfectly clearly, I corrected. You were thinking about yourself. The same way you've always thought about yourself. The same way this entire family has always operated. Claudia collapsed into one of the chairs in front of my desk, sobbing. Preston looked helplessly between us, clearly out of his depth. I remained standing, my voice level and professional. Claudia, I need you to understand something. What happened Friday night was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 33 years of being dismissed, ignored, and undervalued by our family. Our father had me arrested because he fundamentally could not believe I was capable of success. Our mother supported him. And you? I paused, making sure she was looking at me. You stood by and watched. I didn't know he was going to do that, Claudia protested. None of us knew. You knew he called the police. You watched me get handcuffed. You heard them accuse me of fraud and identity theft. And you didn't say a word in my defense. I was in shock. So was I said sharply. But I was also the one in handcuffs while my entire family watched and did nothing. Preston cleared his throat. Admiral, I think what Claudia is trying to say is that your parents made a terrible mistake. They've realized that now. They want to make amends. I laughed, a harsh sound. They want to make amends. Did they come here to tell me that themselves? Or did they send Claudia because they were too cowardly to face me? Claudia's silence was answer enough. Let me guess, I continued. Mom is heartbroken. Dad is regretful. They've realized they misjudged me, and now that they know I'm actually successful, now that I have rank and status they can brag about to their friends, suddenly I'm worthy of their attention. They're proud of you, Claudia whispered. No, I corrected. They're embarrassed they were wrong. There's a difference. I walked around my desk, putting the furniture between us like a barrier. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my office. You're going to go back to Harborview and have your wedding. You're going to tell our parents that I don't want their amends or their apologies. And you're never going to come to my workplace uninvited again. Nat, please. I'm not Nat to you anymore, I said firmly. Here, in this building, in this uniform, I'm Admiral Graves. And I'm ordering you to leave. Claudia looked stricken. You can't just cut us all off. We're family. Family doesn't handcuff each other at dinner parties, I replied. Family doesn't believe the worst about you without evidence. Family doesn't spend decades making you feel like you're not enough and then act surprised when you finally walk away. Preston stood, gently pulling Claudia to her feet. We should go, he said quietly. Admiral Graves has made her position clear. Claudia turned at the door, her face blotchy with tears. I'm getting married in 5 days. If you change your mind, if you decide to come, I promise you'll be welcome. I promise things will be different. They won't be different, I said. They'll just be quieter for a while until everyone forgets the embarrassment and goes back to dismissing me. I'm done with that cycle, Claudia. I'm done pretending that if I just try harder, be better, achieve more, maybe this time you'll all see me. I see myself now. And that's enough. After they left, I sat down heavily in my chair. My hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline coursing through my system. Sarah appeared in the doorway, having clearly been listening from her desk. You okay, Admiral? No, I admitted. But I will be. She brought me water, gave me space to breathe, and then gently reminded me I had a conference call in 20 minutes. Work, routine, purpose, these were the things that would carry me through. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and decisions, the familiar rhythm of command providing structure when everything else felt chaotic. By the time I left the office that evening, I felt drained but oddly calm. Tobias was waiting at home with dinner and a bottle of wine. I heard Claudia came by, he said carefully. Sarah called you? She was worried. So was I. I told him about the conversation, about Claudia's tears and apologies and promises that things would be different. About how I'd held firm, maintained my boundaries, refused to be swayed by guilt or manipulation. I'm proud of you, Tobias said simply. I keep waiting to feel guilty, I admitted. To feel like I'm being too harsh or unforgiving. But I just feel tired. That's because you've been fighting this fight your whole life, he observed. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to lay down your weapons and walk away. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about Claudia's last words. The wedding invitation, the promise that things would be different. Part of me, the part that still remembered being sisters, sharing secrets and childhood adventures, wanted to believe it. But I knew better. People didn't change, not fundamentally. And my family had shown me, repeatedly and definitively, who they were. The kindest thing I could do for myself was to believe them. The wedding would happen without me. My family would go on with their lives. And I would build a future that had nothing to do with earning their approval or fitting into their narrow definition of success. Friday night had been the breaking point. Today had been the confirmation. And tomorrow would be the beginning of something entirely new. 3 months later, I stood on the deck of the USS Constellation, watching the sun rise over the Atlantic. The carrier was preparing for deployment, and I was here for the final inspection before she left port. The deck crew moved with practiced efficiency around me, their movements choreographed through years of training and discipline. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I'd unblocked a few numbers over the past weeks, not family, but mutual acquaintances who'd reached out with genuine concern rather than manipulation. This message was from someone unexpected, my childhood best friend, Amy Thornton, who I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Nat, I heard what happened. I'm sorry I didn't reach out sooner. I've been thinking about you. Coffee sometime? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I'd like that. Not everyone from my past was toxic. Not every bridge needed to burn. Some just needed time and distance to determine if they were worth crossing again. The JAG investigation had concluded 2 weeks ago. Commander Wilson had been true to her word, efficient and discreet. The final report confirmed that my father had filed a false police report, but recommended no criminal prosecution at my request. However, the report also noted that Gerald Graves' actions demonstrated reckless disregard for the truth and a willingness to weaponize law enforcement for personal grievances. The Harborview Police Department had sent him a formal letter of warning. It wasn't much, but it was something. A mark on his record, a reminder that actions had consequences even for wealthy, influential men. Patricia had showed me the report in her office, watching my face carefully as I read it. How do you feel? She'd asked. Like it's finally over, I'd replied. And mostly, it was. Claudia's wedding had happened 3 weeks ago. I knew because Amy had texted me a photo of the local newspaper's society page, Claudia in white, Preston in a tux, my parents beaming beside them. The Graves family celebrates, read the caption. I'd been cropped out of existence so thoroughly it was like I'd never been born. I'd stared at that photo for a long time, waiting for the pain. It came, but duller than expected, more like a healed scar than an open wound. They looked happy. Good for them. Their happiness no longer required my diminishment. The day after the wedding, I'd received a package at my office. Inside was my old sketchbook, the one I'd asked my father for when I was 15, the one he'd refused to buy because I'd quit halfway like everything else. Someone had found it at a craft store, wrapped it carefully, and included a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. For the daughter who never quit. From a mother who's learning what that means. No signature. But I knew it was from my mother. Not an apology exactly, more an acknowledgement. It sat on my desk now, still in its original wrapping. I wasn't ready to open it yet. Maybe I never would be. But I kept it there as a reminder that people were complicated, that even those who hurt us sometimes had moments of clarity, even if too late to matter. Life had continued with surprising normalcy. Work filled my days with purpose and challenge. Tobias and I had started talking about what came next, maybe adoption, maybe fostering, maybe just building a life rich with meaning beyond traditional family structures. We had time to decide. I'd also started therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand. To unpack 33 years of conditioning, to identify the patterns I'd internalized, to make sure I didn't carry my family's dysfunction into my own future. My therapist, Dr. Lauren Westfield, was a veteran herself who understood military culture and family trauma in equal measure. You're not healing to go back to them, she'd told me in our 3rd session. You're healing to go forward without them. That distinction had changed everything. The sound of boots on metal pulled me from my thoughts. Captain James Morrison approached, saluting crisply. Admiral, the inspection is complete. All systems are ready for deployment. Excellent work, Captain. Give my regards to your crew. They've done outstanding work preparing for this mission." As he walked away, I noticed a young sailor watching me from across the deck. She was maybe 22, fresh-faced and nervous, clearly wanting to approach but uncertain of protocol. I made the decision for her, walking over. "What's your name, sailor?" She snapped to attention. "Seaman Recruit Daniels, ma'am." I just wanted to say. She paused, gathering courage. "My family didn't want me to enlist either. They said I was making a huge mistake, that I'd never amount to anything in the military. But I heard about what happened to you, and it reminded me why I joined in the first place. To prove to myself that I could." I felt something tighten in my chest, not pain, but connection. "How long have you been in?" 4 months, ma'am. I'm still figuring everything out." "We all are," I said gently. "Even at my rank. But here's what I've learned. You don't join the military to prove anything to people who don't believe in you. You join because you believe in something larger than yourself. The proving part? That's just a side effect of becoming who you were always meant to be." Her eyes shone with understanding. "Thank you, ma'am. That helps." As she returned to her duties, I realized that this moment, this connection, was worth more than 1,000 family dinners where I was tolerated but not valued. This young woman saw herself in my story not because I'd been victimized, but because I'd refused to let that victimization define me. The story had spread throughout the fleet, just as Patricia had predicted. But the narrative that survived wasn't about family drama or public humiliation. It was about resilience, about standing up for yourself, about refusing to accept other people's limitations as your own. I'd received letters from sailors across the world, men and women who'd faced similar rejection from their families, who'd been told they weren't good enough or smart enough or worthy enough. They didn't want my pity or my anger. They wanted to know it was possible to succeed anyway. And I could tell them, honestly and completely, it was. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Tobias. "Dinner tonight? That Italian place you love? We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" I typed back. 3 months of freedom. That's worth celebrating. He was right. 3 months since that terrible dinner. 3 months since I'd set boundaries and held them. 3 months of building a life not in reaction to my family's rejection, but in commitment to my own values and goals. I looked out over the water, watching the constellation prepare to leave port. Ships were designed to move forward, cutting through whatever waters they encountered. They didn't succeed by looking back at the shore they'd left behind. They succeeded by keeping their eyes on the horizon and trusting their navigation. That evening, Tobias and I sat at a small table in the back of Antonio's, the Italian restaurant we discovered shortly after moving to the area. Wine, pasta, candlelight, simple pleasures that felt profound in their ordinariness. "I got a call today," Tobias said as we waited for our food. "From Admiral Chen's office." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" "There's a position opening up on the joint staff. Pentagon assignment. They want to know if we'd be interested." Washington, D.C. The heart of military and political power. It would be a prestigious assignment, a clear indication that my career was still on track despite, or perhaps because of, recent events. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "That I'd discuss it with my wife and get back to them." He studied my face. "What do you think?" I considered it. A year ago, I might have hesitated because D.C. was only a few hours from Harborview. I might have worried about running into my family, about the awkwardness and pain of proximity. Now I realized that geography didn't matter. I'd created distance that had nothing to do with miles and everything to do with emotional boundaries. I could live anywhere and maintain those boundaries, because they existed inside me, not on a map. "I think we should seriously consider it," I said. "It's a good opportunity." Tobias smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "You're really okay, aren't you?" "I'm getting there," I admitted. "Some days are harder than others. I still have moments where I wonder if I did the right thing, if I was too harsh, if maybe I should have tried one more time. But then I remember that I tried for 33 years. That's enough. Our food arrived, and we ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Tobias asked the question I'd been expecting, "Do you think you'll ever talk to them again?" I set down my fork, considering carefully. I don't know. Right now, I can't imagine what that would look like or what purpose it would serve. They'd have to demonstrate real change, not just words, but sustained, meaningful change over time. And honestly, I don't think they're capable of that. But you're leaving the door open? I'm leaving the door unlocked, I corrected. Not open. There's a difference. Open means inviting them back in. Unlocked means if they do the work, truly do the work to understand what they did wrong and why it was wrong, there might be a conversation someday. But I'm not waiting for it. I'm not hoping for it. I'm just acknowledging it's theoretically possible while moving on with my life. Tobias reached across the table, taking my hand. You know what I love most about you? Your ability to be both strong and open at the same time. You set boundaries like steel, but you don't let them make you hard. I squeezed his hand back, feeling grateful for this man who'd stood beside me through everything, who'd never asked me to be smaller or quieter or less than I was. We finished dinner and walked along the waterfront, watching ships pass in the darkness, their lights reflecting on the black water. Somewhere out there, the Constellation was beginning its deployment, carrying hundreds of sailors toward whatever missions awaited them. Each one with their own story, their own struggles, their own families who either supported or dismissed them. I hope Seaman Daniels makes it, I said suddenly. The young sailor you talked to today? Yeah. I hope she builds the career she wants, earns the respect she deserves, and never lets anyone convince her she's less than extraordinary. She's got a good role model, Tobias observed. I thought about that, about being a role model, about how my story was no longer just mine but had become part of something larger. It was uncomfortable sometimes, knowing that my pain had become public, that my family drama was discussed in wardrooms and ready rooms across the fleet. But it was also powerful. Because for every person who gossiped or judged, there were 3 more who saw themselves in my struggle and drew strength from it. Who realized they weren't alone. Who understood that success despite rejection was possible. We drove home through quiet streets, the base lit up like a small city against the night sky. This was my world now, not the one I'd been born into, but the one I'd chosen. Not the family that had rejected me, but the family I'd built, Tobias, Patricia, Sarah, the sailors I commanded, the friends I'd made through shared purpose rather than shared blood. As we pulled into our driveway, I saw a car I didn't recognize parked across the street. For a moment, my stomach clenched. Had my family tracked me down again? But then I saw Amy get out, waving sheepishly. I know we said coffee sometime, she called out. But I was in the area and I thought, maybe now is as good a time as any? I looked at Tobias, who nodded. I'll put on a pot of coffee, he said, heading inside to give us privacy. Amy and I sat on the porch steps, the same way we used to sit on her parents' porch when we were teenagers, sharing secrets and dreams. I'm sorry I disappeared, she said without preamble. After college, I got caught up in my own life, and your family made it clear I wasn't welcome around you anymore. Your mom told me you changed, that you weren't the same person. I should have reached out anyway. Why didn't you? I asked, not accusingly, just curious. Because I believed them, she admitted. I believed their version of you instead of remembering the actual you. And I'm sorry for that. We talked for hours, about the years we'd lost, about what had happened at the rehearsal dinner, about the choice I'd made to cut contact. Amy listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything or convince me to reconcile. You know what's weird, she said eventually. Your parents tell everyone you're stubborn and difficult. But the Natalie I remember was the most loyal, forgiving person I knew. You'd give people chance after chance. So if you've cut them off completely, it's because they burned through every chance you ever gave them. It was validating to hear that from someone who'd known me before the military, before the estrangement, when I was just a girl trying to figure out who she was. When Amy finally left, promising to stay in touch this time, I went inside to find Tobias reading on the couch. He looked up, questioning. "Good visit?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, settling in beside him. "Really good." That night, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, the kind of sleep that comes from genuine peace rather than exhausted surrender. And when I woke the next morning, I didn't immediately check to see if anyone from my family had tried to contact me. Didn't wonder what they were doing or saying or thinking about me. I just got up, put on my uniform, and went to work. Because this was my life now. Not defined by absence or rejection, but by presence and purpose. Not about what I'd lost, but about what I'd built. Not the daughter my parents wanted, but the woman I'd become despite them. 3 months had passed since that terrible dinner. 3 months of healing, of boundary setting, of learning to value myself the way I'd always deserved to be valued. And as I walked across base that morning, returning salutes and greeting sailors, I realized something profound. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn a place in my family. Now I'd finally found my place, and it had nothing to do with them at all. The story could have ended with anger or bitterness, with revenge or regret. Instead, it ended with something simpler and more powerful, with me, finally free, walking toward a future of my own design. And that, I realized, was the best ending of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.